Silence had been his only companion since she left. Diego watched the rain hitting the windows with hands that no longer knew how to caress, eyes that had forgotten how to shine. But on that stormy night, desperate knocks on his door brought something unexpected. Two soaked girls, trembling, with eyes that recognized the same pain he carried. And so, amid cups of warm coffee and whispered words, the ranch that smelled of loneliness began to be perfumed with freshly baked bread and hope. If this story touches your heart, gift me your like as one offers a hand to someone who has walked alone for too long. And tell me, how do you think this story of broken hearts learning to beat again will end? The wind howled through the loose boards of the old ranch like a wounded animal. Outside, the storm punished the thirsty earth with ancient fury, and lightning drew ephemeral veins in the black sky of the plains. Diego Montes observed the frantic dance of the rain from his fogged window, with a cup of cold coffee between his rough hands. For years, silence had been his only faithful companion. The wooden walls held echoes of conversations that no longer existed, and the occasional creaking of the floor was the only music that resonated in those rooms. Diego had built his solitude as others build shelters, with patience and determination, brick by brick, absence after absence. The rusty bathroom mirror reflected a face weathered by sun and wind, framed by premature wrinkles that drew maps of roads not traveled. His eyes, the color of wet earth, had lost the shine of expectation, but retained a gruff dignity, like trees that survive droughts. Each night, Diego repeated the same ritual, dining in silence, cleaning the dishes with unnecessary meticulousness, and sitting by the window with his cup of coffee, observing the horizon like someone waiting for something he knows will never arrive. The Dry Stone Ranch had become both a refuge and a prison, a place where time seemed to stand still among dust and memories. That night, however, as thunder broke the monotony of silence, something changed. An urgent knocking on the door cut through the roar of the storm. Diego remained motionless, as if his body had forgotten how to respond to a call. 3 more knocks, now desperate. With slow movements, he placed the cup on the pine table and stood up. His worn boots dragged the weight of routine across the wooden floor. Upon opening the door, the wind pushed furious. Raindrops inside, and with them, an unexpected presence. A girl of about 10 years, soaked to the bone, trembled on the threshold. Her dark hair clung to her pale face, and her eyes, wild with fear, shone with a mute plea that Diego immediately recognized. It was the look of someone fleeing from something. "My sister is hurt," said the little one with a broken voice. "Please, sir, please." Before Diego could process what was happening, the girl was already pulling on the sleeve of his shirt, dragging him into the stormy night. The man instinctively took his worn raincoat from the coat rack and followed her, feeling how the rain punished his face with the force of a painful memory. The barn smelled of damp hay and old wood. Leaks formed small puddles on the dirt floor, and the wind sneaked through the cracks, whistling ghostly melodies. In a corner, on a pile of straw, a smaller girl sat, clutching a faded teddy bear to her chest. Diego approached cautiously, like one approaches a frightened animal. The little one, who couldn't be more than 8 years old, looked at him with glassy eyes. Her ankle, slightly swollen, rested in a strange position, but it was something in her gaze that stopped Diego. He had seen enough injuries in his life to recognize when something didn't quite fit. "She's twisted her ankle," explained the older sister, wringing her wet hands. We were... "It doesn't matter now," interrupted Diego, with a voice hoarse from disuse. "We need to get inside." With gentle but sure movements, he took the girl in his arms. She weighed as little as a memory. The teddy bear remained trapped between the little one's chest and his own, like an external heart that beat with both their fears. The ranch kitchen, normally shrouded in shadows, came to life under the yellowish light of the oil lamp. Diego placed the girl on the old cracked leather sofa and lit the fire in the wood stove. The heat began to spread slowly, like a question no one dares to ask. While heating a pot of soup left over from the previous day, he observed the girls out of the corner of his eye. The older one remained standing next to her sister like a sentinel, with tense shoulders and alert gaze. The little one still clung to her teddy bear, whispering words he couldn't quite hear. "What are your names?" asked Diego, as he served the steaming soup in 2 chipped bowls. "I'm Lucia," replied the older one after a moment of hesitation. And she's Elena. Diego nodded, without asking more. He handed them the bowls and looked for dry blankets in an old chest. The silence, accustomed to reigning in that house, had transformed into something different, filled with unasked questions and contained answers. That night, as the storm continued to batter the ranch, Diego improvised 2 beds in the small guest room that no one had used in years. From his own room, he could hear the girls' whispers, fragmented words that slipped under the door like nocturnal insects. Looking at the peeling ceiling, Diego wondered what he would do when morning came. The answer remained suspended in the air, mixing with the sound of the rain that, little by little, began to subside. The first rays of sun filtered lazily through the worn curtains, drawing golden patterns on the wooden floor. Diego had been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee between his hands, contemplating how his years-long routine had been altered in a single night. Elena's ankle seemed to improve with surprising speed. By the 3rd day, the girl was already walking with barely a slight limp, though she still pretended to be in pain when she thought Diego was watching her. He said nothing. He had recognized the lie from the first moment, but something in the desperation of those childish eyes prevented him from confronting them. The girls spoke little. Lucia, the older one, moved through the house with studied caution, as if afraid to break some invisible balance. Elena, on the other hand, had begun to explore the corners of the ranch with silent curiosity, always with her teddy bear as shield and companion. Diego noticed that Lucia carried with her a small metal box that she guarded with special care. She held it with both hands, like one transporting water in the desert, but never opened it. When their gazes crossed, the girl pressed the box against her chest, as if fearing he might snatch it away. The days acquired a strange rhythm, a choreography of silences and measured gestures. Diego found himself preparing elaborate breakfasts, dusting off forgotten books from his shelves, and repairing the old swing that hung from the ancient oak tree next to the porch. One afternoon, while chopping wood in the backyard, he heard laughter. The sound, as unexpected as a bird's song in winter, stopped him in his tracks. Eleanor was swinging on the newly repaired swing, her face illuminated by a joy that seemed out of place in that ranch accustomed to melancholy. At night, after the girls retired to sleep, Diego would sit on the porch, listening to the nocturnal sounds of the plains. The aroma of bread he had baked that morning still floated in the air, mixing with the perfume of damp earth. For the first time in years, the ranch smelled of something more than loneliness. A week after the girls' arrival, Diego found a folded note under his morning coffee cup. Lucia's childish handwriting formed trembling letters. "Thank you for not asking." Questions. Those words stayed with him throughout the day, like a stone in his pocket that one touches from time to time to check it's still there. The truth came on a moonless night, when the silence of the ranch seemed denser than usual. Diego was sitting on the porch, absently carving a piece of wood, when he felt Lucia's presence behind him. The girl remained motionless in the doorway, like an indecisive shadow. "I can't sleep," she finally murmured, advancing with cautious steps to sit on. The wooden step, at a prudent distance from Diego. The man nodded without saying anything, continuing with his carving. His rough hands slowly transformed the piece of wood into the figure of a horse. Crickets sang in the darkness, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the ancient oak. "Eleanor isn't hurt," Lucia said suddenly, in a voice so low that Diego had to lean forward to hear her. She never was. The confession floated between them like a firefly, briefly illuminating the darkness, before vanishing. Diego stopped carving but kept his gaze fixed on the wooden figure in his hands. "I know," he responded simply. Lucia raised her head, surprised. Her eyes shone with tears held back under the dim light escaping from the kitchen window. "You knew? Since when?" "From the beginning." A thick silence settled between them. In the distance, a coyote howled at the night, a solitary sound that seemed to take with it part of the tension. "Mom is sick," continued Lucia, nervously, playing with the frayed edge of her shirt. "She has something in her head that makes her forget things. Sometimes she forgets us." Her voice broke. Diego waited, giving her the space needed to find the words that seemed to escape her. "The last time was worse. She didn't recognize us for days. They took her to the hospital and we heard they wanted to separate us. I couldn't let them take Elena and me apart." Diego remembered the metal box that Lucia always carried with her. The girl, as if reading his thoughts, took it out of her pants pocket and held it between her small hands. "It's a music box," she explained. "Mum gave it to us. She said that if she ever forgot us, the music would help her remember." She didn't open it. Diego understood that that object was more than a simple box. It was a container of hope, a talisman against forgetting. "I should take you to the sheriff tomorrow," said Diego, though the words sounded hollow even to himself. Lucia looked at him with suddenly terrified eyes. "Please don't do it. They'll separate us, please." Diego observed the girl's face, the desperation that tensed her childish features. He recognized in that gaze something familiar, the same fear that had accompanied him in his own childhood, when circumstances forced him to separate from those he loved. "I won't," he finally decided, returning to his carving. At least not yet. The relief on Lucia's face was like a sunrise. The girl remained seated next to him while longer, watching as his hands shaped the wooden horse. When she finally rose to return to bed, Diego handed her the carved figure. "For Elena," he said simply. Lucia took the wooden horse with reverent care, as if she had been given an incalculable treasure. "Thank you," she whispered, and in that simple word there was a universe of gratitude. After the girl disappeared into the house, Diego remained seated on the porch for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night and wondering at what moment the presence of those girls had begun to crack the walls he had so carefully built around his heart. The spring festival of the town of Aguas Claras was a tradition that dated back to the times when the first settlers established themselves in the region. The streets were adorned with garlands of wildflowers. Food stalls perfumed the air with aromas of cinnamon and honey, and the central plaza was transformed into a dance floor under the open sky. Diego hadn't attended the festival in years. He preferred the solitude of his ranch to curious looks and forced conversations. However, that morning, as he watched Elena braiding daisies in the backyard, he made a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you like to go to the spring festival?" he asked during breakfast, with a voice that sounded strange even to himself. The girls looked up from their plates, with expressions as astonished as if the table had begun to float. "Really?" Elena's eyes shone with an emotion Diego hadn't seen before. "Can we go?" Lucia, more cautious, studied Diego's face as if looking for a trap. "Why would you take us?" The question contained years of learned mistrust. Diego shrugged, uncomfortable with the need to explain an impulse that even he didn't fully understand. "I thought you might like it," he responded simply, getting up to take his plate to the sink. "But if you prefer to stay—" "We want to go," exclaimed Elena, jumping from her chair and running to Diego to hug his waist. With a spontaneity that left him paralyzed. It was a brief gesture, just a few seconds of contact, but Diego felt something inside him slowly thawing, like a river at the beginning of spring. The town was more crowded than he remembered. As they walked among the festival stalls, Diego noticed the curious glances that followed them. It wasn't common to see him in company, much less with two girls. Whispers spread in their wake, like ripples in a pond. Elena marveled at every detail. The brightly colored sweets, the music of the local band, the silk ribbons that decorated the plaza trees. Lucia, although trying to maintain her vigilant attitude, couldn't entirely hide the joy that seeing her sister so happy brought her. It was by the lemonade stand where it happened. Diego was paying for 3 glasses when he heard a woman's muffled exclamation behind him. "It's them, Helena Storm's nieces." The name fell like a stone in the tranquil pond that morning had been. Diego turned slowly to find a small group of people observing the girls with renewed interest. A woman held a local newspaper, pointing to a photograph where Lucia and Eleanor appeared next to an elegant woman. "They've been looking for them for weeks," the woman continued, approaching with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "How is it that they're with you, Diego?" The gazes passed from the girls to him, now loaded with suspicion. Lucia had gone pale, and her hand instinctively sought her sister's. Diego felt the weight of public attention settle on his shoulders like a lead cloak. "We got lost," Lucia intervened, with a voice that tried to sound firm. "Mr. Montes found us and is taking care of us until our mum recovers." The explanation, halfway between truth and lie, seemed to momentarily satisfy the curiosity of those present. However, Diego knew the questions wouldn't end there. The festival, which had begun as a promise of joy, had transformed into a minefield of inquisitive looks and whispered comments. That night, back at the ranch, the silence in the truck was as dense as fog. Eleanor had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the day's emotions. Lucia looked out the window, with the music box firmly held in her hands. "They're going to come looking for us, aren't they?" she finally asked, without taking her gaze from the nocturnal landscape. Diego gripped the steering wheel more tightly than necessary. "Probably." "And will you tell them where we are?" The question hung suspended in the air like a musical note. Diego thought about the consequences of his actions, about the laws he was probably breaking, about what was right according to the outside world. Then he thought about Lucia's frightened eyes that first night, about Elena's laughter on the swing, about breakfasts shared in silent camaraderie. "No," he finally responded, with a certainty that surprised him. "I won't." It was a decision made in silence, without grand declarations or elaborate promises. Simply the certainty that those girls had found refuge in his solitude, and he would not be the one to tear them from that precarious balance. Upon arriving at the ranch, Diego carried the sleeping Elena to her bed. As he tucked her in, he noticed that the girl still held between her fingers a blue ribbon from the festival. Carefully, he placed it on the bedside table, next to the wooden horse he had carved for her. When he left the room, he found Lucia waiting for him in the hallway, with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply. Diego nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude he didn't feel he deserved. Before he could respond, the girl had turned around, disappearing into the room she shared with her sister. That night, sitting on the porch under a sky studded with stars, Diego found a letter in his jacket pocket. It was from the bank, and its content was clear. He had 3 months to pay the accumulated debt, or he would lose the ranch. He crumpled the paper in his calloused hands and put it back in his pocket. The girls had enough worries, this would be his alone. Summer arrived with a scorching heat that dried the earth and lit the horizon with trembling mirages. Mornings began early at the ranch, with the rooster's crow and the murmur of the wind among the thirsty trees. Diego had grown accustomed to the girls' presence, in a way he would never have imagined possible. Lucia helped him with ranch chores, learning with surprising quickness how to milk the old cow, collect eggs, and repair fences. Elena, with her contagious enthusiasm, had turned the backyard into a fantasy kingdom where stones were castles and ants were armies on the march. That afternoon, as Diego repaired the barn roof, he saw the dust cloud on the road before hearing the engine. A blue pickup was slowly approaching along the path that led to the ranch. His heart skipped a beat. He descended the ladder with more haste than he intended, dropping the hammer which bounced with a metallic sound on the dusty ground. The girls were inside the house. Good. He walked toward the front of the ranch, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his forearm, trying to control the accelerated pulse that hammered in his temples. The pickup stopped next to the ancient oak. The door opened, and a woman descended with fluid movements. The sun at her back momentarily turned her into a faceless silhouette, but when she advanced toward him, Diego felt the ground beneath his, feet transforming into quicksand. He knew those eyes. He had seen them before, younger, more innocent in another time and place. But now they belonged to an adult woman with a tired but determined face, with dark hair gathered in a braid that fell over her right shoulder. "Diego Montes?" she asked, stopping a few steps away. Her voice had a familiar timbre that stirred long-buried memories. Diego nodded, unable to formulate words. "I'm Sofia Vega," the woman introduced herself. "I'm looking for my nieces, Lucia and Elena. They told me in town that they might be here." The world seemed to stop for an instant. The birdsong, the buzzing of insects, the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Everything was suspended as Diego processed what he had just heard. The girl's aunt, their mother's sister, and also, "I remember you," Diego finally said, with a voice that didn't seem his own. "From the rodeo in San Miguel, 20 years ago." A spark of recognition illuminated Sofia's eyes. She tilted her head slightly, studying his face like someone trying to decipher a blurry text. "The rider with the sad eyes," she murmured, and there was something in her tone that suggested that memory had also stayed with her throughout the years. "I didn't recognize you at first." A distant thunder interrupted the moment. Both looked up at the sky, where dark clouds were accumulating on the horizon, promising one of those sudden storms so typical of summer in the plains. "You should come in," said Diego, gesturing toward the house. "The storm will arrive soon." Before Sophia could respond, the house door flung open. Elena appeared on the porch, freezing instantly upon seeing the newcomer. Her eyes opened wide, and she dropped the teddy bear she was carrying. "Aunt Sophia!" The cry of joy resonated in the still air, and the girl ran toward the woman, throwing herself into her arms with an impulse that almost knocked her over. Lucia appeared in the doorway a second later. Unlike her, "Sister?" Her reaction was more contained. She remained motionless, clutching the music box against her chest like a shield, with an expression where joy mixed with fear. Sophia hugged Elena tightly, lifting her off the ground in a spin that drew laughter from the girl. Then she looked at Lucia, extending an arm to her in a silent invitation. "I've been looking for you for months," she said, with a voice broken by emotion. "My little warrior, come here." Lucia hesitated a moment more before running to her aunt. The three melded in an embrace that seemed to want to compensate for months of absence. Diego observed the scene, suddenly feeling like an intruder, a spectator in a play that didn't belong to him. The first raindrops began to fall, large and heavy, raising small clouds of dust as they impacted the dry ground. Diego cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We should go inside," he suggested, picking up the fallen teddy bear and dusting it off with a care that surprised even himself. The ranch kitchen, which for weeks had been the scene of quiet breakfasts and shared dinners, now seemed too small to contain all the emotions that floated in the air. While the storm raged outside, lashing the windows with liquid fury, Sophia listened to the girl's story, their faces intermittently illuminated by the lightning that crossed the sky. Diego kept to the background, preparing coffee and placing freshly baked cookies, another of the new customs the girls had brought to his life on a chipped plate. He observed Sophia out of the corner of his eye, noticing the gestures she shared with her younger sister, the way she tilted her head when listening attentively, the small crease that formed between her eyebrows when something worried her. "Mom had another episode," Lucia explained with a maturity inappropriate for her age, worse than the previous ones. "She didn't recognize us, and the doctors said she might not recover this time. We heard the social worker talk about separating us," added Elena, with eyes bright with tears. "They said there was no family that could take care of both of us. But I was looking for you," interrupted Sophia, taking both girls' hands in hers. "I was in Europe when it all happened. I came back as soon as I could, but you were already gone." The explanation continued, revealing months of searching, false leads, growing desperation, until finally an article in the local newspaper about the Spring Festival had shown two girls who looked too much like her nieces to be a coincidence. Diego listened in silence, feeling how each word built an invisible wall between him and the girls. A wall made of blood, family, and belonging, things he could not offer them. "We've been safe here," Lucia finally said, when the conversation reached a standstill. "Diego has taken good care of us." The way Lucia pronounced his name, with a mixture of respect and affection, made something contract painfully in Diego's chest. Sophia looked at him then, really looked at him, as if until that moment he had been only a peripheral presence in the room. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," she said with sincerity. "Thank you for taking care of my girls." My girls. The words confirmed what Diego already knew, that Lucia and Elena had never been his to keep, that their presence at the ranch had been just a parenthesis, a temporary detour in the path they had to travel. "It was nothing," he responded, with a harshness he didn't intend but couldn't avoid. Outside, the storm had reached its peak. The wind shook the trees violently, and the rain beat against the windows as if trying to force its way in. A particularly close lightning bolt illuminated the kitchen with ghostly light, followed almost immediately by a thunder that made the foundations of the house tremble. "The Aguas Baja bridge will be flooded with this storm," Diego commented, looking out the window into the darkness. "It's not safe to drive tonight." Sophia followed, his gaze understanding the implication of his words. "Could we stay until the storm passes?" The question floated in the air like a leaf in the wind. Diego nodded briefly, feeling that gesture opened the door to something he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. "Of course," he responded, getting up to prepare the guest room. "The dry stone ranch has always been a refuge for those who need it." What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that that ranch, which for years had been his fortress against the world, now felt strangely incomplete at the prospect of returning to its previous solitude. The storm that should have lasted one night extended for 3 days. The torrential rains turned the roads into rivers of mud, knocked down trees, and cut electricity across the entire region. The dry stone ranch was isolated from the world, like an island in a turbulent sea. Those days forced a coexistence that none of them had foreseen. During the mornings, Diego and Sofia worked together to repair the damage caused by the storm. Fallen fences, leaks in the roof, frightened animals that needed care. The girls helped in their way, running between puddles with oversized rubber boots, laughing under the persistent drizzle. In the afternoons, when physical work gave way to rest, they took refuge in the living room. Diego had dusted off old board games that no one had touched in years. From his armchair, he watched as Sofia and the girls became engrossed in dominoes games or built castles that invariably collapsed amid laughter. At night, after the girls retired to sleep, Diego and Sofia shared the covered porch, listening to the constant patter of rain on the roof. At first, their conversations were cautious, limited to comments about the weather or the next day's tasks. But little by little, like a stream that finds its course, they began to flow into deeper territories. "How did you end up on this ranch?" Sofia asked on the third night, as they shared a bottle of wine. "Found in the pantry. You seemed too alone here." Diego contemplated the garnet liquid in his glass, looking for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to share. "It was my uncle's," he finally responded. "He left it to me 10 years ago when he died. I had nowhere else to go." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was part of it. Sofia nodded, as if that partial explanation was enough for now. She took a sip of wine and looked toward the darkness that extended beyond the porch. "My sister and I grew up near here," she said, with a nostalgia that tinged her words with muted colors. "We had a ranch not very different from this one before the drought ruined everything." Diego looked at her with surprise. Something in that story seemed familiar to him, like a distant echo of forgotten conversations. "What was the name of that ranch?" "Hidden Spring," Sofia responded, and her eyes shone with the reflection of distant memories. "It was on the other side of the valley, near the canyon." The name hit Diego like a stone. He remembered stories about Hidden Spring, a prosperous ranch that had succumbed during the Great Drought 15 years ago. He also remembered rumors about the Vega sisters, the owner's daughters, one of whom had become a famous singer. "Your sister is Helena Storm," he said, finally connecting the pieces of the puzzle. The singer. Sofia nodded, with a mixture of pride and sadness. She changed her name when she started her career. She said that Helena Vega didn't sound dramatic enough for country music. A melancholy smile curved her lips as she ran her finger along the edge of her glass. "The illness began 3 years ago," she continued. "Episodes of memory loss, increasingly frequent and prolonged. The doctors say it's a rare form of early-onset dementia, possibly related to an old injury." Diego remembered the music box that Lucia always carried with her, the talisman against forgetting. "The girls adore her," he said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. "And she them. That's why it's so devastating when she doesn't recognize them. Imagine looking into the eyes of your own daughter and finding nothing familiar there." The silence that followed was charged with a shared pain, with wounds different but equally deep. The rain had subsided, turning into a soft drizzle that caressed the roof with liquid fingers. "I remember you, you know," Sofia said suddenly, turning to look at him directly. "From the rodeo in San Miguel. You were different then." Diego felt the past catching up with him, like a shadow that finally trapped him after years of running. "We were all different then." "Yes, but you shone somehow. You had that intensity, that passion, as if every second was vital." "I was young and naive," Diego responded, with more bitterness than he intended. "You were alive," Sofia corrected gently. "What happened to that young man?" The question hung between them, like a musical note that refuses to fade. Diego contemplated his empty glass, feeling the weight of the years and the decisions not taken. "He got lost," he finally responded, "like so many other things." Sofia didn't press further. Instead, she began to talk about her own life, her travels as a photographer, the cities she had known, the stories she had captured with her camera. Diego listened, letting himself be carried by the cadence of her voice, by the landscapes she painted with words. When dawn began to tinge the horizon with pale, pink, they were still on the porch, their silhouettes cut against the nascent light like figures in an old daguerreotype. "I should take the girls when the roads dry up," Sophia said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Their mother needs them and they need her." Diego nodded, though a knot formed in his throat. He knew it was right, the inevitable, but that didn't make it hurt any less. "They're good girls," he responded, with a voice that sounded strange even to himself. "They deserve to be with their family." "You'll miss them too," Sophia observed, and it wasn't a question. Diego didn't respond. There was no need. The answer was in the newly painted swing, in the dusted-off books, in the cupboard full of cookies he had never baked before. "You could—" Sophia began, but she interrupted herself, as if doubting her own words. "You could visit them if you wanted. They won't be so far away." The offer floated in the air like a feather, light but loaded, with possibilities. Diego contemplated it, not yet daring to take it. "I'll think about it," he finally responded, rising from his chair. "We should rest. Tomorrow, there's much work to do." As he entered the house, Diego felt the weight of the bank letter in his pocket, a constant reminder that soon he might not have a home to invite anyone to. The next morning dawned clear, as if the storm had never existed. The sun shone with renewed intensity on the puddles that still splashed the path, turning each drop into a small rainbow. The air smelled of wet earth and possibilities. Diego went out early to check the damage to the barn. The broken tiles and loose boards would require several days of work, but at least the main structure had resisted. While examining a damaged beam, a noise behind him made him turn. Elena was at the entrance to the barn, with her teddy bear firmly secured under her arm and a drawing notebook in the other hand. "Good morning, Mr. Diego," the girl greeted, balancing on her heels with that contained energy so characteristic of her. "May I draw here?" Diego nodded, unable to deny her anything. During the last few weeks, he had discovered that the little one had a natural talent for drawing. Her creations, though childish, captured something essential about the objects and people she portrayed. Elena settled on a bale of hay, opening her notebook with reverence. Diego continued with his work, aware of the attentive eyes that followed his movements. From time to time, the girl asked him to stay still for a moment, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her lips, in a gesture of concentration as she traced lines on the paper. "Why do you never smile in the photos?" Elena asked suddenly, without looking up from her drawing. The question caught Diego off guard. He paused with a hammer halfway. "What photos?" "The ones in the chest in the attic," Elena responded naturally. "We found them the other day when we were playing explorers. There are many photos of you, but you never smile." Diego felt a shiver run down his back. It had been years since he had opened that chest, a repository of memories he preferred to keep closed. He didn't know the girls had found it during their games. "You shouldn't be snooping in the attic," he said, with more harshness than he intended. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the tone, her eyes instantly filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing her notebook. "We didn't mean to do anything bad." Regret hit Diego hard. He approached the girl and crouched in front of her, trying to soften his expression. "No, I'm sorry," he said with a hoarse voice. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. It's just that chest contains things that remind me of difficult times." Eleanor looked at him with that intuition that children sometimes have, that capacity to see beyond words. "Is that why you're always sad? Because of the things in the chest?" The question, in its childish simplicity, touched something deep in Diego. Was he always sad? He hadn't realized that his melancholy was so evident that even an 8-year-old could perceive it. "I'm not always sad," he responded, trying to smile to prove it. "It's just that sometimes adults keep things that hurt inside, like when you hurt your knee but don't want to cry." Elena seemed to consider this explanation, tilting her head slightly. "But when I get hurt and don't cry, it hurts more afterward," she finally said, with crushing logic. "Mum says that sometimes you have to cry to let the pain out." Diego was left speechless by the simple but profound wisdom of the girl. Before he could respond, Elena opened her notebook and tore out a page, handing it to him with a shy smile. "I made it for you," she said, "so you can put it in the chest with the sad photos. That way, when you open it, you'll see something happy too." The drawing showed 4 figures holding hands in front of what was clearly the ranch. A tall, lanky one. That must be him. 2 small ones representing the sisters, and a female figure that could only be Sophia. Above them, a smiling sun illuminated the scene, and in the sky, birds shaped like V's flew in formation. Diego took the drawing with hands that suddenly seemed too large and clumsy for something so delicate. A knot formed in his throat, preventing him from speaking. "Do you like it?" asked Elena, with expectant eyes. Diego nodded, unable to find words that would do justice to what he felt. Carefully, he folded the drawing and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "It's the best gift I've been given in a long time," he finally managed to say. Elena smiled, satisfied, and returned to her notebook with renewed enthusiasm. Diego continued with his work, but something had changed. As if a small crack had opened in the wall he had built around his emotions. That afternoon, while the girls helped Sophia prepare dinner, Diego went up to the attic. The chest was there, covered by a thin layer of dust that evidenced the recent touch of small hands. He opened it with a squeak of rusty hinges. Inside, neatly arranged, were the remains of a previous life, black and white photographs of his parents, whom he barely remembered, medals from rodeos won in his youth, letters never sent, a hat that had belonged to his uncle, and under all of that, carefully folded, documents yellowed by time. Diego extracted them carefully, unfolding them on the dusty attic floor. They were property deeds, notarial acts, sales receipts. His eyes stopped on a name that appeared in several of the documents, Hidden Spring Ranch. A shiver ran down his back as he read. According to the papers, part of the lands that now made up the Drystone Ranch had originally belonged to Hidden Spring. His uncle had bought them during the Great Drought, when the Vega family was forced to sell to survive. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit. Fate, with its strange sense of humor, had brought the granddaughters of the former owners back to the land of their ancestors. As he stored the documents in the chest, his fingers touched something metallic. It was an old key, rusted, but still recognizable. The key to the secret compartment in the base of the chest, where his uncle kept his most precious objects. Diego took it, hesitating a moment before using it. The compartment opened with difficulty, revealing its content hidden for years. A worn leather notebook, some old photographs, and a yellowed envelope. Diego took the envelope, opening it carefully. Inside was a letter written in his uncle's unmistakable handwriting, addressed to him. The date in the upper corner indicated it had been written a week before his death. Diego began to read, feeling how the past and present intertwined in each word. The letter revealed his uncle's remorse for having acquired the Vega family's lands, taking advantage of their desperation during the drought. He confessed to having paid less than half their real value, knowing they had no other option. In his last days, that act weighed on his conscience. "If someday you have the opportunity to do the right thing, Diego, I hope you have more courage than I did," the letter concluded. Diego remained seated on the dusty attic floor for a long time, with the letter in his hands and the weight of a decision slowly forming in his heart. When he finally came down, he found Sophia in the kitchen, finishing dinner preparations. The girls were on the porch, playing with the shadows cast by the setting sun. "There's something you should see," said Diego, placing the documents on the table. Sophia looked at him with curiosity, drying her hands on the apron before approaching. As she examined the papers, her expression went from curiosity to surprise, and finally to an understanding tinged with emotion. "This ranch," she began, with a trembling voice. "Part of it was your family's," Diego completed. "My uncle bought these lands during the drought." Sophia ran her fingers over the documents, as if by touching the paper she could connect with the past they represented. "I remember when Dad had to sell," she said, with her gaze lost in memories. "It was the beginning of the end for our family. Mom never recovered from losing the ranch. She said our soul was in this land." Diego observed her profile cut against the golden light of the sunset. At that moment, he made a decision that had been silently forming inside him since the girls' arrival. "When the roads are completely dry, we'll go to town," he said. "I want to talk to the notary about these documents." Sophia looked at him, trying to decipher his intentions. "What are you thinking, Diego?" He shrugged, uncomfortable under the intensity of her gaze. "Just doing the right thing, I guess." That night, while everyone slept, Diego took out Elena's drawing and contemplated it under the dim light of the lamp. 4 figures holding hands in front of the ranch. A family. The idea, which before would have seemed terrifying, now shone in his mind with unexpected warmth. Slowly, he went back up to the attic and opened the chest. Carefully, he placed Elena's drawing on top of everything else, like a promise, like a new beginning. The tradition of the Council under the Oak dated back to the times of the first settlers of Aguas Claras. When the community faced important decisions or conflicts that affected everyone, the town elders convened a meeting under the ancient oak that grew in the center of the plaza. There, in the shade of its branches twisted by time, solutions were sought that respected both justice and shared history. It had been decades since a formal council had been convened. That's why, when the posters appeared nailed to posts and notice boards around town, a murmur of surprise and expectation ran through Aguas Claras like a wave. Diego observed one of these posters, nailed to the post in front of the sheriff's office. "Council under the Oak," it said in large, solemn letters. "Matter, the Drystone Ranch and the Vega family. This Saturday at sunset." It hadn't been his idea. After visiting the notary and explaining the situation, the news had spread like wildfire in dry grass. The mayor, Don Esteban Morales, had decided that a matter of such historical importance for the town deserved to be treated in the old way. "Are you sure about this?" asked Sophia, who observed the poster at his side with a worried expression. "I don't want the entire town involved in something that should be your decision." Diego put his hands in the pockets of his worn jeans, contemplating the horizon where the sun began its descent. "This land has history," he finally responded. "And that history doesn't belong just to me. Maybe it's better this way." Saturday arrived with a clear sky and a heat that made the air vibrate above the dusty roads. Diego wore his only good shirt, clumsily ironed the night before. The girls, excited at the idea of participating in such an ancient tradition, had insisted on wearing their Sunday dresses. "We look like a real family," Elena commented with innocence as they climbed into the truck. Diego and Sophia exchanged a quick glance, but neither responded. Some truths were too fragile to be named yet. The plaza was more crowded than Diego remembered ever seeing it. It seemed like the entire town had shown up, from the elderly who could barely walk without help to the babies who dozed in their mothers' arms. Chairs had been placed in a semicircle under the oak's branches, and in the center a simple wooden table where the documents Diego had taken to the notary rested. The murmur of conversation ceased when Mayor Morales stepped forward, positioning himself next to the table. Beside him, Don Felipe Torres, the oldest man in town, leaned on a cane carved with animal figures. "We are gathered here," the mayor began with a solemn voice, "to address a matter that touches the very roots of our community. The land we stand on has memory, and today it asks us to listen to its history." A respectful silence spread across the plaza as the mayor briefly explained the situation. How part of the Drystone Ranch lands had originally belonged to the Vega family, how they had been acquired during the Great Drought by Diego's uncle, and how, by a twist of fate, the granddaughters of the former owners had found refuge precisely on those lands. "Diego Montes," said the mayor, turning toward him, "has expressed his desire to rectify what he considers a historical injustice. He is willing to return part of the lands to the Vega family without compensation." A murmur of surprise ran through the assembly. Diego felt all eyes fixed on him, and for a moment wished he could disappear. He had never liked being the center of attention. "However," continued the mayor, "this presents legal and practical complications. The bank has a mortgage on the ranch, and Diego faces the possibility of losing it all in the coming months." This revelation provoked another murmur, this time of concern. Diego saw how Sophia turned toward him with a surprised and hurt expression. He hadn't told her about the bank's threat, not wanting to worry her with his problems. Don Felipe Torres stepped forward, tapping his cane against the ground to claim attention. "Before making hasty decisions," he said, with a surprisingly strong voice for his age, "I believe we should listen to what the land itself has to tell us." The old man made a gesture, and a middle-aged man stepped forward. Diego recognized him. It was Gabriel Reyes, a geologist and son of the town who had made a career in the capital. "I have analyzed water samples from the spring that bubbles in the northern part of the Drystone Ranch," explained Gabriel, placing some papers on the table. "The results are extraordinary." The geologist proceeded to explain, in terms he tried to simplify so everyone could understand, that the spring water contained a unique combination of minerals with medicinal properties. According to his analyses, It could have therapeutic applications, especially for certain types of neurological disorders. That's why they called it Hidden Spring, Don Felipe intervened, with eyes bright with emotion. The old stories spoke of its healing properties. My grandmother used to say that the water from that spring could awaken the sleeping and calm the disturbed. An astonished silence followed these words. Diego felt the world spinning around him. The spring, which for him had never been more than a reliable water source for livestock, could be the key to saving the ranch. And perhaps much more. Sophia then stood up with slightly trembling hands. "My sister," she said with a clear but emotional voice, "suffers from a neurological condition that affects her memory. The doctors have tried various treatments, with limited results." She turned to Diego, and in her eyes shone a hope so intense it almost hurt to look at it. "Do you think the spring water could help her?" Before Diego could respond, Gabriel Reyes intervened again. "I can't promise medical results without appropriate clinical studies," he said with professional caution, "but the mineral composition is similar to that of thermal waters used in Europe for complementary treatments of certain neurological conditions." The meeting continued for hours, with interventions from various community members. Some told stories they had heard from their grandparents about the spring's properties. Others proposed practical solutions for the ranch's legal situation. The bank representative, present at the assembly, suddenly seemed interested in exploring refinancing options given the economic potential of the discovery. As the sun set and lanterns began to illuminate the faces gathered under the oak, a strange sensation took hold of Diego. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He was surrounded by a community that, despite his tendency toward isolation, he considered his own. And beside him, Sophia and the girls formed a kind of nucleus, an anchor amid the storm of words and possibilities. When he was finally asked to speak, Diego rose with trembling legs. He had never been good with words, much less in front of so many people. "I don't know much about miraculous springs or healing properties," he began, with a hoarse but firm voice. "I only know that this land has been thirsty for justice for too long. My uncle made a mistake by taking advantage of the Vega family's desperation. I want to correct that mistake." He paused, searching for the right words. "If the spring water can help Helena, these girls' mother, it would be as if the land itself wanted to heal old wounds. I don't care what the bank says or what the ranch is worth now. I want the Vega family to recover what rightfully belongs to them." A respectful silence followed his words. Then, from the back of the assembly, a voice rose. "What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to honor justice without you losing everything?" All heads turned. A woman was making her way through the crowd. Diego recognized her immediately. It was Marta Linares, the lawyer who had helped several town families in land disputes. "I've been listening carefully," Marta continued, advancing until she stood next to the central table. "And I believe there's a solution that respects both the past and the future. A legally constituted partnership between Diego Montes and the Vega family for the management of the spring and its medicinal properties. Each party would contribute what they have. Diego, the land and existing facilities; the Vega family, the historical rights, and, if I may say so, the family knowledge about the water's properties that seems to have been transmitted through generations." The proposal was met with murmurs of approval. The bank representative seemed especially interested, making quick notes in a notebook. Diego looked at Sophia, seeking her reaction. She returned his gaze with a mixture of hope and caution. "What do you think?" Diego asked quietly, as the discussion continued around them. Sophia took his hand for an instant, a gesture so brief it might have gone unnoticed by everyone except them. "I think there are paths that are destined to cross," she responded, "and that sometimes what seems like the end of a story is just the beginning of another." The news came in the form of a phone call a week after the council under the oak. Diego was repairing the corral fence when Lucia came running from the house, her face illuminated by an emotion contained for too long. "It's Mom!" she shouted, waving her arms as if wanting to embrace the air itself. "She's asked about us. She remembers us." The hammer remained suspended in the air, forgotten in Diego's hand. Sophia appeared on the porch, holding the phone against her chest, with silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "The doctor says she's had an unexplainable improvement," she explained with a trembling voice. "She asked where we were, got anxious, until they told her we were safe. She wants to see us." Eleanor, who had been helping Diego with the nails, dropped her small hammer and ran to her aunt, hugging her waist tightly. "Can we go?" she asked, lifting her face with pleading eyes. "Can we see Mom?" Sophia caressed the girl's hair, looking at Diego over her head. A silent question floated between them, one that neither dared to formulate aloud. "Of course you can go," Diego responded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She's your mother. She needs you." Preparations for the trip began immediately. While the girls gathered their few belongings, Diego remained on the porch, contemplating the horizon with a feeling of emptiness that expanded in his chest like an ink stain in clear water. Sophia sat beside him with restless hands on her lap. "It won't be a definitive goodbye," she said, as if she could read his thoughts. "With the spring business, we'll have to return soon." Diego nodded mechanically. The arrangements for the partnership proposed by Marta Linares were advancing with surprising speed. The bank, enthusiastic about the economic prospects of the medicinal water, had not only withdrawn the threat of mortgage foreclosure, but had offered additional financing to develop adequate facilities. "I know," Diego responded. "It's just that—" He didn't complete the phrase. There was no need. Both knew that in just a few weeks, those girls had transformed the ranch from a solitary refuge to a home full of life. Their absence would leave a silence different from the one Diego had known before, a silence that would hurt in a different way. "We'll be back for the Harvest Festival," Sophia promised, gently placing her hand on Diego's. "It's only a month, and meanwhile, we'll stay in touch by phone." Diego looked at their joined hands on the arm of the rocking chair. A picture that seemed simultaneously natural and impossible. "What are we, Sophia?" he suddenly asked, with a frankness that surprised even himself. "You and I. What are we building here?" Sophia looked away, fixing it on the horizon where the sun began its daily descent. "I don't know," she responded with honesty. 20 years ago we met briefly and took different paths. Now life has reunited us in a way that neither of us could have imagined. But I know that when I'm here, with you and the girls, I feel like the pieces fit, as if I've found a place where I don't have to explain who I am or where I come from, a place where I can simply be." Diego felt something warm expanding in his chest, momentarily displacing the cold weight of the imminent separation. "The ranch will be waiting for you," he said, gently squeezing Sophia's hand before releasing it. "I will be waiting for you." The departure occurred at dawn the next day. The suitcases, surprisingly more voluminous than on their arrival, occupied the trunk of Sophia's pickup. The girls, with a mixture of excitement and sadness, toured the ranch, saying goodbye to each corner. The swing under the oak, the hen house where they had collected eggs every morning, the barn where Eleanor had drawn so many times. When the final moment came, Eleanor launched herself into Diego's arms with an impetus that almost knocked him down. The man held her tightly, breathing in the scent of soap and innocence in her hair. "Don't forget to water." "My flowers," the girl whispered against his neck, "and to talk to them every morning. They like your voice." Diego nodded, unable to trust his own voice to respond. When Elena finally separated, Lucia advanced with more caution, but with a determination that shone in her dark eyes. "I'll take care of them," she said, with a seriousness improper for her 10 years. "And I'll keep the music box for when we return." To Diego's surprise, the girl handed him the precious object she had so jealously protected for weeks. "But it's your treasure," Diego protested, trying to return it. Lucia shook her head, closing Diego's hands around the box. "Mom said music helps remember," she explained. "I want you to have it so you don't forget us while we're away." The gesture, in its childish simplicity, contained a wisdom and generosity that moved Diego to his core. With reverent care, he put the box in his shirt pocket next to his heart. "I couldn't forget you, even if I wanted to," he responded, with a voice hoarse with contained emotion. Sophia's farewell was more contained, a brief hug and a murmured promise to call as soon as they reached their destination. But her eyes, when they met Diego's, contained a message that went beyond words. Diego remained on the path, raising his hand in a gesture of farewell as the pickup drove away, raising a cloud of golden dust under the rising sun. He stayed there long after the vehicle disappeared on the horizon, as if expecting it to turn around and return at any moment. Finally, when the sun was already high in the sky, he turned toward the silent house. The ranch seemed larger and emptier than ever, but somehow it no longer felt like a prison. The girl's laughter seemed to have impregnated the walls, like an echo that refused to fade. In the kitchen, on the table, he found an envelope that wasn't there before. His name was written in Sophia's elegant handwriting. Inside was a photograph, him and the girls sitting on the porch at sunset, with relaxed expressions they rarely showed to strangers. He didn't remember when it had been taken. On the back, Sophia had written a simple phrase, "So you remember that you're no longer alone." Diego placed the photograph on the mantelpiece, where he could see it from his favorite armchair. Then he took out the music box that Lucia had entrusted to him, and after a moment of hesitation, opened it. A soft, nostalgic melody filled the room. The notes seemed to dance in the air, transforming the silence into something alive, full of memories and promises. At the end of the melody, a recorded voice, warm and slightly distorted by time, pronounced words that resonated in the empty house. "If someday I forget everything, may this music remind me that loving is a place to return to." Diego closed his eyes, letting the melody repeat, carrying him to a place where silence was no longer his only companion. The harvest festival of Aguas Claras was the most important celebration of the year. For 3 days, the entire town transformed. The streets were adorned with golden spikes and pumpkins of all sizes, barns were converted into dance halls, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted apples permeated the air like an intoxicating perfume. Diego had never been fond of festivities. In previous years, he barely approached town enough to sell some ranch products and then return to his usual solitude. This year, however, he found himself dusting off his only good shirt and polishing his boots with a dedication that would have embarrassed him to admit. The ranch had changed in the month since the girls' and Sophia's departure. Work to condition the spring had begun almost immediately after the council under the oak. A team of geologists and engineers regularly visited the property, taking measurements, collecting samples, and designing what they called therapeutic facilities, respectful of the natural environment. Diego had observed these activities with a mixture of amazement and wariness. The idea that his quiet ranch could become a treatment center seemed as strange as it was unsettling. However, whenever doubt threatened to overcome him, he remembered Sophia's hopeful face when she spoke of the possibilities the spring water offered for her sister. Phone calls with Sophia and the girls had become the anchor of his days. At first, they were brief and somewhat uncomfortable, full of silences and unfinished phrases. But gradually, naturalness had returned between them. Elena enthusiastically told him about her school adventures, Lucia informed him about her mother's progress, and Sophia talked about everything and nothing, future plans and shared memories, slowly weaving a bridge over the distance that separated them. The last call, received the night before, still resonated in his mind as he drove toward town. "We'll be there tomorrow," Sophia had said, with an excitement barely contained in her voice. "And we won't come alone." Diego hadn't needed to ask what she meant. Helena, the girl's mother, had shown steady improvement over the last month. Doctors spoke of partial remission and recovery of cognitive functions, technical terms that failed to capture the miracle it meant for the girls to recover their mother. The town bustled with activity when Diego parked his truck on the outskirts of the main square. Entire families strolled among the stalls, children ran chasing brightly colored kites, and musicians tuned their instruments in the central bandstand, preparing for the evening dance. Diego walked feeling strangely visible, as if everyone could notice the anticipation consuming him inside. Several neighbors greeted him with a familiarity that before he would have found invasive, but that now, surprisingly, didn't seem entirely uncomfortable. "Diego!" Marta Linares' voice stopped him in front of the empanada stand. "Just the man I was looking for." The woman approached, holding a leather folder under her arm. "I have the final documents for the partnership," she explained, patting the folder. "Only a few signatures are missing. Do you know if the Vega family has arrived yet?" Diego shook his head, trying to control the small jump his heart gave at the mention of that surname. "They should arrive today," he responded, instinctively looking toward the road that led to town. "I don't know exactly when." Marta nodded, observing him with a knowing smile that made Diego feel uncomfortably transparent. "It's not just about business, is it?" asked the lawyer, with a frankness that was part of her reputation in town. Diego looked away, fixing it on the dancers rehearsing in the square. "It's complicated," he finally responded. Marta laughed softly, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "The best things always are, Diego. I'll look for you later for the signatures." As the lawyer moved away through the crowd, Diego continued his walk through the festival. He stopped in front of a craft stand, where an old woman wove intricate patterns on traditional looms. One small tapestry in particular caught his attention. It showed a tree with deep roots next to a spring, with tiny human figures gathered in its shade. "It's the tree of memory," explained the old woman, noticing his interest. "According to old legends, it grew next to the sacred spring. It said that its roots touched waters as ancient as time itself, and that whoever drank from them would remember even what they had never lived." Diego gently touched the fabric, following the contour of the tree with his fingers. "How much is it?" he asked, making a sudden decision. With the tapestry carefully wrapped in tissue paper and stored in the inner pocket of his jacket, Diego continued his tour. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, tinting the sky with golden and rosy hues. The band had begun to play, and couples gathered on the improvised dance floor in front of the bandstand. It was then that he saw them. A small group of people had just arrived at the square. Among them, 3 figures stood out that Diego would have recognized anywhere. Elena, in a blue dress with a crown of wildflowers on her loose hair. Lucia, more serious but with a special shine in her gaze. And Sophia, radiant in a simple ochre-colored dress that seemed to capture the very essence of autumn. Next to them, leaning slightly on the arm of a man who must be a medical assistant, walked a woman who could only be Helena Storm. Despite the evident fragility in her movements, she retained the elegance that had made her famous in her years as a singer. Her resemblance to Sophia was undeniable, though her features showed the wear of the illness she had been fighting. Diego remained motionless, suddenly unsure. It was one thing to expect this moment, and quite another to face it. What would he say to Helena? How would he explain the strange situation that had led them all to this point? Before he could decide whether to approach or not, Elena saw him. The girl's cry of joy cut through the square like a ray of sunshine, attracting the attention of several onlookers. "Diego! Diego!" Elena ran toward him, skillfully dodging passers-by, and threw herself into his arms with the total abandon that only children can allow themselves. Diego instinctively lifted her, spinning in a circle that drew crystalline laughter from the little one. "I missed you so much," Elena declared when he finally set her on the ground, with the seriousness of one announcing a great truth. "The swing at Grandma's house isn't as good as yours." Diego smiled, feeling how something tense inside him loosened slightly. "I missed you too, little one," he responded, surprised by the ease with which the words left his mouth. Lucia approached more calmly, but the smile that illuminated her face was as genuine as her sister's. When she reached them, she formally extended her hand, as if introducing herself, to a stranger. "Mr. Montes," she said, with a seriousness that comically contrasted with the mischievous shine in her eyes. Diego shook her hand with equal formality, playing along. "Miss Vega," he responded, slightly inclining his head. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Lucia maintained her composure for one more second before breaking into laughter and also throwing herself into his arms. Diego hugged her tightly, surprised by how much he had missed these girls who, just a few months ago, were complete strangers. When he looked up, Sophia and Helena were in front of him. Sophia smiled with a mixture of tenderness and something deeper that Diego didn't dare to name. Helena observed him with serene curiosity, like someone trying to remember a dream upon waking. "So you're the famous Diego," said Helena, with a voice that, although weakened, retained the musicality that had made her famous. "My daughters have talked of nothing else for weeks." Diego suddenly felt self-conscious, aware that he probably didn't look anything like what Helena might have imagined, based on the girl's stories. "I'm not as interesting as they've surely painted me," he responded, running a hand through his hair in an unconscious gesture. Helena studied him with eyes that seemed to see beyond his external appearance. "On the contrary," she finally said, "I think you're exactly as they described you. A man of few words, but many actions. Someone who offers refuge without asking for explanations." She paused, and her expression softened even more. "I owe you my daughter's safety during my absence. There aren't enough words to thank you." Diego shook his head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. They brought life to a place that had been dead for too long, he responded with sincerity. If anyone should be grateful, it's me. The band began to play a more lively melody, and Elena pulled on Diego's sleeve with enthusiasm. Let's dance, she exclaimed. Mom says festivals are for dancing, not for standing around talking. Diego shot a panicked look at Sophia, who simply shrugged with an amused smile. I'm afraid I don't know how to dance, he tried to excuse himself. Eleanor rolled her eyes with comic exasperation. Everyone knows how to dance, she declared with the unarguable logic of childhood. You just have to move your feet and be happy. Before he could protest further, Diego found himself dragged to the dance floor by two determined girls. To his surprise, Sophia and Helena followed them, forming a small circle among the crowd of dancers. And so, under the slowly darkening sky and the garlands of lights that began to shine like earthly stars, Diego Montes found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades: dancing. His movements were clumsy at first, rigid from years of solitude and restraint, but little by little, guided by the contagious joy of the girls and the encouraging smiles of Sophia and Helena, he began to loosen up. At some point, the band changed to a slower melody. Couples naturally formed on the dance floor, and the girls ran to get sweets from a nearby stand. Helena, visibly tired, but with an expression of deep satisfaction, retired to one of the tables arranged around the square, leaving Diego and Sophia alone in the middle of the dancers. They looked at each other, suddenly uncomfortable, like teenagers at their first dance. We don't have to, Diego began. I'd love to, Sophia interrupted at the same time. Both laughed, and the tension dissipated like fog under the sun. Diego extended his hand and Sophia took it, allowing him to draw her close with a delicacy that contrasted with his rugged appearance. They danced in silence at first, their bodies finding a shared rhythm that seemed to have existed forever, as if they had been rehearsing for this moment for years. How is your sister really? Diego finally asked, his voice barely audible over the music. Sophia rested her head lightly on his shoulder, a gesture so natural that both pretended not to notice. Better than the doctors expected, she responded. She has good days and not so good days, but the memories are returning, especially those related to the girls. The doctors are intrigued. They say it's unusual in this type of condition. She paused, and Diego felt her take a breath as if preparing for something important. She wants to try the spring water, Sophia continued. When I told her about the discovery, she insisted it had to do with the stories our grandmother told us. She says she remembers drinking from that water when she was a child, during visits to our grandparents' ranch. Diego nodded, remembering the legend mentioned by the weaver. The tree of memory, he murmured, more to himself than to Sophia. She separated slightly, looking at him with surprise. You know that story? My grandmother used to tell it to us before bedtime. She said the tree and the spring were connected, that its roots touched waters older than time. Diego smiled, thinking of the tapestry resting in his jacket pocket. I have something for you, he said. For all of you, actually, but it can wait until after the dance. They continued moving to the rhythm of the music, increasingly comfortable in each other's arms. Around them, the harvest festival shone with life and celebration, but for Diego the entire world had reduced to that small space he shared with Sophia. What will happen afterward? He finally asked, giving voice to the question that had been circling his mind for weeks. When the papers are signed and the spring is operational, will you return to the city? Sophia looked up, her eyes reflecting the festival lights like captured stars. That depends, she responded with an enigmatic smile. On what? On whether there's enough space in that old ranch for 4 noisy women and their memories. Diego's heart took such a violent leap that for a moment he feared Sophia might feel it through his chest. The ranch has never been as much a home as when you were there, he responded with an honesty that surprised even himself. There's more than enough space for all the memories you want to bring, and for the new ones we can create together. The music stopped, but they continued swaying gently, caught in a moment that neither wanted to break. In the distance, the girls were returning running, their hands full of sweets, and their faces illuminated by the joy of reunion. Diego thought about the long road he had traveled, since that stormy night when 2 frightened girls knocked on his door, about how the silence of his solitude had gradually transformed into the shared silence of understanding, and finally, into the music of a possibility he had never imagined for himself. Winter came gently to the plains, like a visitor who asks permission before entering. Mornings dawned covered by a thin layer of frost that shimmered under the early sun like diamond dust, and nights grew increasingly longer, inviting, gathering around the fire and sharing stories. The Dry Stone Ranch, now officially renamed Spring of Remembrance in the documents of the new partnership, had experienced a transformation that went far beyond its name. The facilities to harness the spring's properties were almost finished. A main building of wood and stone that harmoniously integrated with the landscape, small cabins for visitors seeking treatment, and carefully traced paths that led from the main facilities to the spring itself. But the deepest transformation wasn't visible to the eyes. It was the spirit of the place that had changed, as if the land itself had awakened from a long lethargy. Diego observed these changes from the porch, where he had taken the habit of sitting each evening. The cold of the incipient winter didn't dissuade him. He simply added another blanket over his shoulders. From there, he could contemplate the constant flow of life that now animated the ranch. Helena had been the first to experience the effects of the spring water. After a week of drinking 2 glasses daily, she had begun to remember details of her childhood she believed forever lost. The taste of cinnamon cookies her grandmother prepared, the texture of the dress she wore at her first piano recital, the exact sound of her father's laughter. The doctors, initially skeptical, had been impressed enough to initiate a formal study. Now, a small group of patients with similar conditions regularly visited the spring, all reporting gradual but significant improvements. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia's voice interrupted his reflections as she sat beside him in the double rocking chair they had recently installed. Diego smiled, observing how the evening light gave Sophia's face a golden glow that accentuated the soft curve of her cheeks. "About roots," he responded, gesturing toward the horizon where the old solitary oak stood out against the reddish sky. "About how they intertwine under the ground. Invisible but fundamental." Sophia nodded, understanding without needing further explanations. Since she and the girls had definitively settled at the ranch after the harvest festival, they had developed that type of communication that doesn't always require complete words. "Helena wants to do a small concert for Christmas," she commented, leaning her head slightly on Diego's shoulder. "She says music returns to her, as if it had never left." Diego remembered the music box that Lucia had entrusted to him, and that now occupied a place of honor on the living room mantelpiece. "If someday I forget everything, may this music remind me that loving is a place to return to." The recorded words had acquired a new meaning, becoming a kind of unofficial motto for the Spring of Remembrance. "It will be beautiful," he responded, imagining Helena's voice, which in recent weeks had begun to sing again, first in whispers while working in the garden, then with more confidence during family dinners. From inside the house came the girls' laughter. They were helping their mother prepare dinner, an activity that had become a shared ritual. Diego never ceased to marvel at the naturalness with which his solitary life had transformed into this tapestry of sounds, smells, and presences. "I received a letter from Marta today," said Sophia, taking an envelope from her sweater pocket. "The application to register the spring water as a complementary treatment has been preliminarily approved. They'll need more studies, of course, but it's a start." Diego nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and amazement. When the girls had arrived at his door that stormy night, he never would have imagined that moment of impulsive compassion would lead him here, to the creation of something that could help people like Helena recover parts of themselves they believed forever lost. "Sometimes, I think," he began, hesitating a moment before continuing, "that all this was destined to happen, as if the spring had been waiting all these years, keeping its secrets until the right moment." Sophia intertwined her fingers with his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "My grandmother used to say that water has memory," she responded, "that it remembers everyone who has drunk from it, and that sometimes, when necessary, it returns to them what they have lost." Twilight slowly gave way to night. The first stars began to appear in the sky, like silent witnesses to the transformations occurring under their eternal light. "It's time for dinner," announced Elena, appearing at the door with an apron too large that dragged on the floor. "Mum says if you don't come now, I'll eat your portion." Diego and Sophia exchanged a knowing look before rising. The threat was credible. Elena's appetite was legendary, especially since she had begun helping in the garden they had planted next to the visitors' cabins. The kitchen, which had once been the epitome of Diego's austere solitude, now overflowed with life and color. Helena stirred a steaming pot while Lucia finished setting the table, carefully placing the Tree of Memory tapestry as a centerpiece, a tradition they had established since Diego gave it to them after the harvest festival. Just in time, Helena smiled, whose face had recovered the healthy glow shown in old photographs. Diego, could you bring the bread from the oven? The familiarity of the scene, far from feeling routine, continued to amaze Diego each day. These small interactions, these everyday requests, were the threads that wove the new tapestry of his existence. During dinner, as they had made a habit, each shared something about their day. The girls talked about school and their friends. Helena commented on the progress of patients who came to the spring. Sophia showed the photographs she had taken for the informational brochure they were preparing. When his turn came, Diego spoke about the old solitary oak next to the spring. That morning he had discovered something extraordinary, a small green sprout emerging from one of its exposed roots, a shoot that promised to become a new tree. The old roots are nourishing new life, he concluded, with a simplicity that enclosed an entire universe of meaning. Lucia, who at 10 years showed a sensitivity that sometimes surprised even her mother, nodded thoughtfully. Like us, she said. We're like that sprout, aren't we? Growing from ancient roots. Helena looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement, recognizing in her a wisdom that transcended her age. Exactly like us, my little philosopher, she responded, extending her hand to caress Lucia's hair. We are all sprouts from ancient stories. After dinner, while the girls helped Helena wash the dishes, Diego took Sophia by the hand and led her to the back porch, where the view of the night sky was particularly impressive. There's something I want to show you, he said, with a shyness that contrasted with the confidence he had developed in recent months. From his pocket he extracted a small carved wooden box. Sophia immediately recognized it as part of his recent project. Diego had begun carving small objects during autumn afternoons, animal figures for the girls, a jewelry box for Helena, and now this mysterious box for her. It's beautiful, Sophia murmured, admiring the intricate patterns representing intertwined leaves and roots. Open it, Diego asked, with a voice he could barely control. Inside the box, on a bed of blue velvet, rested a simple but beautiful ring. It wasn't an ostentatious jewel, but a silver band with small incrustations that, upon closer inspection, formed the outline of the Tree of Memory. Sophia looked up, meeting Diego's eyes that shone with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. I'm not good with words, he began, taking her hands in his. I never have been, but this past year has taught me that there are silences that nourish and silences that wither. For too long I lived in the second type. Now, he stopped, searching for the right words to express what he felt. Now I want to share the first type with you, he finally continued. The comfortable silences of shared mornings, the meaning-filled silences of afternoons on the porch, the silences of understanding when words aren't necessary. Sophia felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but did nothing to contain them. I've embroidered a cloth, Diego continued, referring to the local tradition, of creating an embroidery representing the home one wished to build. It's not very elaborate, but it says what I want you to know. From his other pocket, he extracted a small piece of cloth where he had embroidered, with somewhat crude but sincere stitches, a single word. Always. If you want, if the girls agree, if you think we could. Sophia gently placed a finger on his lips, stopping his nervous stammering. Diego Montes, she said, with a clear voice but loaded with emotion. We were separated for 20 years. I don't intend to waste another day. And sealing her response with a kiss that tasted of promise and future, of roots that intertwine under the earth and shoots that rise toward the sky, Sophia accepted the ring and all it represented. Winter had arrived in fullness to the plains, enveloping the spring of remembrance in a mantle of white stillness. The snow fallen during the night had transformed the landscape, softening the contours of the ranch and creating a thick silence that seemed to absorb any sound. In the main bedroom, Sophia contemplated the dawn from the window, wrapped in a blanket woven by the town women as an anticipated gift for the wedding that would be celebrated in spring. Beside her, on the bedside table, the silver ring shone with the first light of day, catching flashes of the rising sun that filtered through the curtains. The house still slept. In the adjoining rooms, the girls probably dreamed of the approaching Christmas, while Helena, installed in the former guest room now converted into her studio, rested after weeks of intense work preparing the small concert she would offer as a gift to the community. Diego had gone out before dawn, as every morning, to check that the heating systems of the visitors' cabins functioned correctly. Winter hadn't stopped the arrival of people seeking in the spring a relief for their fragmented memories. On the contrary, there seemed to be something especially powerful in drinking the crystalline water, while snowflakes gently fell on the silent landscape. Sophia dressed silently and went down to the kitchen. She prepared coffee, enjoying the aroma that filled the room with promises of warmth. Through the window, she could see Diego's figure returning from the cabins, his dark silhouette standing out against the immaculate whiteness of the landscape. There was something deeply comforting in that vision, in the certainty of his return. "Good morning," he greeted upon entering, shaking the snow from his boots before crossing the threshold. "The cold bites out there." Sophia handed him a steaming cup of coffee, which he accepted with gratitude. Their hands brushed briefly, and both smiled at that small contact that still, after months of growing intimacy, continued to provoke a warm tingling. "How are our visitors?" asked Sophia, while preparing a simple dough for bread they would bake later. "Holding up well," Diego responded, sitting at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Ramirez says last night she dreamed of her hometown for the first time in decades. She remembers everything: the cobbled streets, the sound of church bells, even the smell of jasmine that grew next to her parents' house." Sophia nodded, already familiar with the effects the spring water produced in those who drank it. It wasn't a miraculous cure, as they had had to carefully explain to each visitor. It was more like a catalyst, something that facilitated reconnection with memories that seemed lost, but, in reality, were only buried under layers of time and pain. "Helena wants to include a special song in the concert," she commented, kneading with rhythmic and precise movements. One she composed when the girls were babies, but had completely forgotten until last week. She says the melody returned to her while drinking from the spring, note by note, as if someone were singing it in her ear. Diego observed Sophia's hands working the dough, finding a hypnotic beauty in those everyday gestures. It was in these small moments, in these shared routines, where he felt they had built something as solid as the ranch walls, but infinitely more valuable. "Sometimes I wonder," he began, with that reflective voice Sophia had learned to recognize as a prelude to his deepest thoughts. "I wonder if the water doesn't so much awaken forgotten memories as allow us to hear what has always been there, speaking to us in a language we had forgotten how to understand." Sophia stopped her movements, considering Diego's words. Since they had discovered the spring's properties, both had developed personal theories about its functioning, sharing their reflections during quiet nights in front of the fireplace. "Like learning anew the language of silence," she responded, resuming her work with the dough. "A language we knew before the world filled us with noise." The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the girls, who burst into the kitchen with the contagious energy that characterized their mornings. Eleanor, with tousled hair and still sleepy eyes, headed directly toward Diego, climbing onto his lap with the naturalness of one occupying a place that belongs to them by right. Lucia, more reserved but equally affectionate, kissed Sophia's cheek before helping to set the table for breakfast. "Can we go to town today?" asked Eleanor, while nibbling on a toast with jam. "I want to buy Christmas gifts." "And visit Grandma Rosa," added Lucia, referring to the old weaver who had become a kind of adoptive figure for the girls. "She promised to teach me how to make gloves." Diego and Sophia exchanged a knowing look. The girls, who at first had been so cautious with the town inhabitants, had now completely integrated into the community. They had friends at the local school, participated in community activities, and had developed special relationships with several of the elderly, who enjoyed transmitting their knowledge to a new generation. "If the road is clear, we'll go after eating," Diego promised. "But first we have to finish our chores here." The ranch chores had become a shared responsibility. Even the girls had specific assignments, adapted to their ages and abilities. Elena was in charge of feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, a task she performed with disproportionate enthusiasm. Lucia, more methodical, helped organize medical supplies and visitor files, showing a surprising aptitude for order and classification. After breakfast, while each attended to their responsibilities, Sophia found Helena on the back porch, contemplating the spring that was now partially covered by a glass canopy to protect it from snow. Sophia's sister, wrapped in a thick woven shawl, held between her hands the old music box that had been the girls' talisman during their flight. "It has returned more to me than I expected," said Helena, without taking her gaze from the spring, sensing her sister's presence without needing to see her. "Not just specific memories, but the very feeling of who I am." Sophia sat beside her, sharing the warmth of the blanket she carried over her shoulders. "Do you know what's strangest?" continued Helena, opening the music box and letting its sweet melody rise in the cold air. "I not only remember my past, sometimes I have the sensation of remembering the future too." Sophia looked at her with curiosity. "How does one remember something that hasn't happened yet?" Helena smiled, with that serene expression she had gradually recovered since beginning to drink from the spring. "They're not literal memories, of course," she explained. "It's more like a certainty, a feeling of recognition toward things that are yet to come, like when I see the girls with Diego and feel he was always destined to be part of their lives. Or when I observe you with him, and it's as if I could see fragments of your story together, a story that is just beginning to be written." Sophia contemplated the snowy landscape, allowing her sister's words to settle in her heart. There was something deeply comforting in that vision, in the idea that her union with Diego wasn't something new, but the rediscovery of an ancient truth, of a pattern that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. "Sometimes I think the real miracle isn't the water," she finally said. "It's finding the people with whom you can share silence." Helena nodded, closing the music box. The melody stopped, but seemed to continue resonating in the frozen air, like an echo that refused to fade. "That's what I'm going to sing at Christmas," she announced. "Not just songs, but the space between the notes, the silence that sustains music, as the earth sustains roots." The day passed in a pleasant succession of everyday tasks and preparations for the visit to town. After lunch, Diego cleared the path with the tractor, and the whole family settled into the truck for the short journey to Aguas Claras. The town was especially beautiful under the snow. The houses and shops adorned for the holidays seemed like they had come out of a Christmas postcard. In the central square, the ancient oak where the council had been held was illuminated with small lights that shone like fallen stars among its bare branches. While the girls dragged Helena from shop to shop in their mission to buy secret gifts, Diego and Sophia took the opportunity to visit Marta Linares. The lawyer received them in her office with the warmth that characterized her. "I have excellent news," she announced after offering them hot coffee. "The application to declare the spring as a resource of cultural and health interest has been approved. This means permanent legal protection and, additionally, the possibility of receiving state funds for research." Diego and Sophia received the news with a mixture of joy and relief. They had worked hard for months to achieve this recognition, collecting testimonies, documenting results, and navigating the complex bureaucracy that an unusual case like this implied. "There's more," continued Marta, with a smile that suggested she had saved the best for last. "The Department of Cultural Heritage is interested in declaring the entire area as a landscape of historical memory, based on oral traditions about the spring and its importance for the region's indigenous peoples. This would add an additional layer of protection and recognition. The idea that the spring and its surroundings would receive such a level of official recognition was almost overwhelming. What had begun as a personal, intimate discovery had transformed into something that transcended their individual lives to become collective heritage. Upon leaving Marta's office, Diego and Sophia walked hand in hand through the snowy streets of the town. The inhabitants greeted them with familiarity, some stopping to chat briefly or to thank them for the help the spring had provided to some relative. "It's strange," Diego commented as they headed toward the square to meet Helena and the girls. "For years I tried to be invisible in this town, avoiding conversations, keeping to the margins, and now you're part of the fabric of the community," Sophia completed, gently squeezing his hand. "Like all of us." In the square, they found Helena sitting on a bench under the ancient oak, watching the girls who were participating in an improvised snowball fight with other town children. Her face reflected a serenity that contrasted with the frantic energy of the high, little ones. "I've remembered something else," she said, when Diego and Sophia sat beside her. "Something from when we were children, Sophia, and we came to visit our grandparents at the ranch." Sophia looked at her with interest. Despite Helena's substantial improvement, new memories continued to appear, like pieces of an infinite puzzle that was gradually completing. "There was a song that grandfather sang while working in the fields," continued Helena, with her gaze lost in some distant point of the past. "A song about a tree and a spring, about roots that drink from ancient waters and branches that touch the future sky." With a soft voice, Helena began to intone a melody that sounded as ancient as the earth itself. It was a simple but deeply moving song, with words in a mixture of Spanish and the ancestral language of the peoples who had inhabited these lands before the arrival of the settlers. Diego listened with a strange feeling of recognition, as if that melody had always been in some corner of his memory, waiting to be awakened. Around him, he noticed that several town elders had stopped, attracted by Helena's singing, and now listened with expressions ranging from surprise to contemplation. When the song ended, a respectful silence spread across the square, broken only by the distant laughter of the children who continued playing, oblivious to the moment of communion that had just occurred. "My grandmother sang that same song," Don Felipe Torres finally said. The old man who had spoken during the council under the oak. "I hadn't heard it in at least 50 years. I thought it had been lost with the last who knew the ancient language." Helena smiled, with a mixture of amazement and serenity. "It was inside me all the time," she responded, "like so many other things I thought lost." The return to the ranch, late in the afternoon, took place in a comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The girls, exhausted from the games and emotions of the day, fell asleep in the back seat, their heads resting against each other like two birds in a nest. Upon arriving, while Helena took the sleepy girls to their rooms, Diego and Sophia remained a moment on the porch, contemplating the sky where the first stars began to shine in the growing darkness. "Do you know what I like most about all this?" asked Sophia, leaning on Diego's shoulder. "It's not the official recognitions or the legal protections or even the healing effects of the water. It's knowing that we're building something that will outlive us." Diego nodded, perfectly understanding what Sophia meant. The spring, the ranch, the community that had formed around them, all of it would continue long after they were gone. Like the old oak whose roots nourished new shoots, their work would sow life that would flourish in future generations. "Like that tapestry you bought at the festival," he responded, referring to the tree of memory that now occupied a central place in their home. "We're just one thread in a much larger design." Sophia smiled, recognizing in Diego's words the same type of intuitive wisdom she so valued in him. He wasn't a man of grand speeches or grandiloquent expressions, but when he spoke from the heart, his words had the deep simplicity of essential truths. "A design that includes all who were before and all who will come after," she added, thinking of the past generations who had known the secret of the spring and the future ones who would continue. Their legacy. That night, as the ranch slept under the protective mantle of snow, Sophia dreamed of roots extending under the frozen earth, seeking each other, intertwining in complex but harmonious patterns, and in her dream, she understood that these roots not only sustained trees and plants, but also stories, memories, and human lives, connecting them across time in an invisible but unbreakable network. Spring arrived on the plains with an explosion of color and life that dramatically contrasted with the white stillness of winter. The fields around the Spring of Remembrance were covered with wildflowers that undulated with the breeze like a multicolored sea. The trees, bare for months, dressed in tender leaves that whispered secrets to the wind. It was the wedding day. The ranch had been decorated with simple elegance. Garlands of wildflowers hung from the porches. Paper lanterns awaited the arrival of dusk to illuminate the paths, and under the ancient oak, now bursting with new life, a rustic altar had been arranged, decorated with flowering branches and colored ribbons that danced with each breath of the spring breeze. In the main bedroom, Sophia contemplated her reflection in the antique mirror they had rescued from the attic. The dress, designed and made by the town women as a collective gift, was a work of art in itself. ivory silk with embroidery representing intertwined branches and roots, similar to those of the Tree of Memory tapestry. Helena, who had assumed the role of principal maid of honor, adjusted the crown of wildflowers on her sister's hair, carefully gathered in a low bun that let some strands escape to frame her face. "You're radiant," she said, finding Sophia's gaze in the mirror, "as if you were shining from within." Sophia smiled, recognizing in her sister's comment a truth she felt in every fiber of her being, the happiness she had found in this place, with these people who had gone from being strangers to family in the course of a year was something she had never imagined possible. "Who would have thought?" she responded, turning to take Helena's hands in hers. "When you came looking for the girls that stormy day, I never imagined we would end up here." Helena squeezed her sister's hands gently, with eyes bright with contained emotion. "I did see it," she confessed. "Not clearly, of course, but that afternoon, when I observed you and Diego on the porch, talking under the rain, I felt an inexplicable certainty, as if I were witnessing not the beginning of something, but the reunion of something that always should have been." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Lucia and Elena entered, resplendent in their junior bridesmaid dresses, with smaller but equally beautiful flower crowns on their heads. "You're beautiful," exclaimed Elena, with eyes bright with admiration. "Like a queen from fairy tales." Lucia, always more reserved but equally expressive in her own way, approached Sophia and took her hand. Solemnly, "Diego is very nervous," she informed, with the seriousness of one transmitting a message of vital importance. "He's changed shirts 3 times, and Uncle Roberto had to help him with the tie." Sophia laughed, imagining the scene. Roberto, Diego's older brother who had come from the capital for the wedding, was as different from his brother as could be, extroverted, talkative, and with a sense of humor that had immediately conquered the girls. "And the guests?" asked Sophia, as Helena handed her the bouquet of wildflowers and aromatic herbs that completed her outfit. "They're all in their places," Elena responded, giving little jumps of excitement. "Even Mrs. Ramirez has come with her family. She says she wouldn't miss for anything in the world the wedding of the people who returned her mother to her, even though her mother isn't physically here." Mrs. Ramirez had been one of the first patients to experience the effects of the spring, although her mother had passed away years. Ergo, the water had allowed her to recover memories of their childhood together that she thought lost forever, offering her a consolation that no conventional treatment had managed to provide. A new knock on the door announced the arrival of Don Felipe Torres, the respected town elder, who, in the absence of Sophia's father, had been chosen to accompany her to the altar. "It's time, daughter," he said with an emotional but firm voice. "Everyone is waiting." Sophia took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nervousness and absolute certainty. It wasn't the type of nervousness that comes from doubt, but rather the emotion that precedes a long-awaited moment. Upon exiting to the porch, she was greeted by a gentle breeze perfumed with the aromas of spring. From there she could see the guests gathered under the ancient oak, town inhabitants who had gone from being strangers to extended family, patients who had found relief in the spring, and friends arrived from various places, attracted by the extraordinary story of love and rebirth that was being celebrated that day. And there, waiting next to the rustic altar, was Diego. His usual cowboy hat had been replaced by a careful hairstyle that Helena had insisted on arranging personally. He wore a simple but elegant suit, and on his face, normally reserved, was drawn an expression of amazement and happiness so pure that Sophia felt her heart expanding in her chest. The music began, performed by a small ensemble that included Helena at the piano. It was an original melody, composed especially for the occasion, that incorporated elements of that ancient song about the tree and the spring that Helena had remembered during winter. The girls advanced first, scattering petals of wildflowers on the path. Then, with her arm firmly supported on Don Felipe's, Sophia began her journey toward the altar. As she advanced, Sophia observed the smiling faces that surrounded her, each representing a thread in the tapestry of her new life. Mrs. Ramirez, who had taught her to prepare the herbal infusions that complemented the effects of the spring water. Doña Rosa, the weaver who had created the Tree of Memory tapestry and who now taught Lucia the secrets of her art. Marta Linares, whose intervention during the council under the oak had been crucial for the spring to become what it was now. and so many others, each with their story, each with a unique connection to the ranch and its inhabitants. Upon reaching Diego, Don Felipe placed Sofia's hand on his with a gesture that symbolized the continuity of ancestral traditions. Diego's eyes, the color of wet earth, shone with an emotion he didn't try to hide. "You're beautiful," he whispered, with that hoarse voice Sofia had learned to love. "And you're home," she responded, completing an exchange that had become their particular way of saying, "I love you." The ceremony, officiated by Mayor Morales, was brief but deeply emotional. It combined elements of local traditions with personal touches that reflected the unique history of the couple. Instead of conventional vows, Diego and Sofia had decided to exchange symbolic objects that represented their commitment. Diego gave Sofia a small sprout from the ancient oak, carefully transplanted to a pot decorated with traditional symbols of fertility and continuity. It represented his promise to nurture joint growth, to provide strong roots and space to expand. Sofia, in turn, gave Diego a music box carved by her own hands, under the patient guidance of Don Roberto. It wasn't expert work, and the imperfections were evident, but that only added authenticity to the gift. Upon opening it, a simplified version of the melody Helena had composed for the wedding played. "So you always remember that loving is a place to return to," said Sofia, repeating the words engraved in the original music box that had accompanied the girls in their flight. When the mayor officially declared them husband and wife, a spontaneous chorus of birds seemed to celebrate the moment, filling the air with jubilant trills. The guests rose to their feet, applauding and throwing flower petals as the couple sealed their union with a kiss that promised many more to come. The celebration that followed was as simple and authentic as the ceremony. Long tables arranged under the open sky, loaded with dishes prepared by all the town inhabitants, each contributing their specialty. Locally produced wine, music that alternated traditional pieces, with original compositions by Helena, and dances that extended well into the night, illuminated by the lanterns that now shone like earthly stars. At one point in the celebration, while Diego awkwardly danced with Helena standing on his feet, Sofia found herself observing the scene from the periphery, absorbing the happiness that emanated from every corner of the ranch. Helena approached silently, offering her a glass of wine. "Happy?" she asked, though the answer was evident in her sister's radiant face. Sofia nodded without taking her gaze from Diego and the girls, who now included Lucia in their improvised dance. "More than happy," she responded. "At peace. As if I had been searching for something all my life, without knowing what it was, and finally found it." Helena smiled, perfectly understanding the feeling. She herself had experienced a similar sensation since the spring began to return to her not just specific memories, but the very essence of who she was. "You know, there's something I haven't told you," she said, with a tone that immediately captured Sofia's attention. "The other day, while drinking from the spring, I remembered something grandmother told me just before she died. Something about a prophecy associated with this place." Sofia looked at her sister with curiosity. Helena rarely spoke of their grandmother's last days, which had coincided with a particularly difficult time in her adolescence. She said that someday, when the time was right, the spring would awaken from its long sleep, continued Helena, with her gaze lost in some distant point, as if she were seeing beyond the present. And that when that happened, it would gather those who should meet, heal ancient wounds, and create a new beginning from endings that seemed definitive. Sofia felt a shiver run down her back, not of fear, but of recognition. The description perfectly fit what had happened since that stormy night when the girls had knocked on Diego's door. "At that moment I didn't give it importance," continued Helena. "I thought they were delusions of an old woman close to death. But now it seems grandmother knew exactly what she was talking about," Sofia completed, feeling a renewed connection with her roots, with the ancestral wisdom that seemed to flow through generations like the spring water through the earth. As they conversed, the first fireflies of the season began to appear, their blinking lights adding a magical touch to the night. Diego approached, with a girl on each arm, both already half asleep after hours of dancing and celebration. "I think it's time to put these little dancers to bed," he said, with a smile that illuminated his normally serious face. "Though they insist they can continue until dawn." Helena took Elena, who weakly protested before settling in her mother's arms with the absolute confidence of one who knows they are deeply loved. Lucia, though regularly insisting she was too old to be carried, clung to Diego's neck with closed eyes, already navigating in the seas of sleep. "I'll put them in my room," Helena offered, "so you can enjoy your special night without worries." With a knowing wink, Helena moved away with the girls, leaving the newlyweds alone in the middle of the celebration that began to quiet down as the night advanced. Diego extended his hand to Sophia, inviting her to a last dance. The music had changed to a slow, sweet melody, perfect for the intimate moment they shared, surrounded by friends and family who were gradually withdrawing, giving them space for this perfect ending to a perfect day. "Do you know what's most extraordinary about all this?" Diego asked as they gently swayed to the rhythm of the music under the starry spring sky. Sophia looked at him, still marveling at how this man of gruff appearance and few words could express, with a look more than others said in long speeches. "What?" she asked, though something inside her already knew the answer. "That it all began with a silence," Diego responded, drawing her closer. "My silence, your silence, the silence of the frightened girls, the silence of Helena forgetting, so many different silences that seemed like insurmountable walls." He paused, searching for the precise words to express what he felt. "And yet look at us now," he continued, gesturing to the ranch brimming with life, the gathered community, the spring that shone under the moonlight like a fulfilled promise. Somehow, all those silences have transformed into something beautiful, as if silence, instead of separating us, had been the fertile ground where all this could grow. Sophia rested her head on Diego's shoulder, feeling the constant beat of his heart, that rhythm that had become the soundtrack of her new life. "The silence that blooms," she murmured, giving voice to the shared thought. And as the music faded and the last couples abandoned the dance floor, Diego and Sophia remained there, swaying gently under the ancient oak, whose roots intertwined with those of the young sapling growing beside it. In the nearby spring, the water continued its eternal flow, carrying with it ancient memories and new promises, past stories and future dreams, all interlaced in an infinite tapestry of lives connected across time and space. And in that perfect moment, in that pause between an ending and a beginning, the silence that surrounded them was not one of absence but of fullness, not of loneliness but of communion. It was the silence that blooms when words are no longer necessary, because everything important has been said, with the most ancient and true language, that of two souls who, after years of searching, finally find their home in each other. The years passed gently over the Spring of Remembrance ranch. The small sapling that Diego had given Sophia on their wedding day grew into a strong young tree, its branches reaching toward the sky, while its roots stretched deep into the earth, seeking those of the ancient. Oak in an underground embrace, unseen but deeply felt. The facilities around the spring expanded thoughtfully, always respecting the natural harmony of the place. People came from increasingly distant places, drawn by stories of memories recovered and hearts healed. Scientific papers were published about the unique mineral properties of the water, but even the most skeptical researchers admitted that something beyond chemical analysis seemed to be at work there. Lucia graduated with honors in psychology and returned to work alongside the doctors who studied the spring's effects. Her unique perspective, having been both witness and participant in the discovery, brought invaluable insights to the research. Elena, true to her artistic nature, became the official chronicler of the ranch, capturing its stories through paintings and illustrations that decorated the main building's walls, telling visitors the tale of two frightened girls who knocked on a lonely man's door during a storm. Helena's voice, fully recovered, filled the ranch on special occasions. Her Christmas concerts became a tradition that people marked on their calendars months in advance. Her songs, especially the ancient melody about the tree and the spring, became synonymous with the place itself, a sonic embodiment of its essence. For Diego and Sophia, each day brought the quiet joy of shared purpose. They walked the ranch together every morning, greeting visitors, checking on the spring, and always ending their route at the young oak that symbolized their union. Sometimes they spoke, discussing plans or sharing observations. Other times they walked in companionable silence, that precious silence they had learned to cultivate and cherish. On the 10th anniversary of the girls' arrival at the ranch, a special celebration was held. Former patients returned to share their stories, town elders recounted the history of the council under the oak, and children performed a play written by Elena about the Tree of Memory and its magical waters. As dusk fell on that day of remembrance and gratitude, Diego found himself sitting on the porch with Sophia beside him, just as they had done countless evenings before. From inside came the sounds of laughter and music as the celebration continued, a symphony of joy that flowed through the open windows. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sophia asked, her hand resting comfortably in his. "That night when two scared girls knocked on your door?" Diego looked at the ranch that had transformed from a place of isolation to a center of healing and community. He thought of the path that had led them here, the fear and trust, the losses and discoveries, the pain and joy that had woven together to create this tapestry of shared lives. "No," he answered honestly, "I couldn't have imagined this, but sometimes I think the spring knew that it was waiting for us all along." Sophia smiled, understanding perfectly what he meant. They had learned that some things cannot be explained, only experienced and honored. As darkness settled fully over the ranch and stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky, a soft melody drifted from the house. Helena playing the song of the Tree of Memory on the piano, its notes floating on the night air like fireflies. Diego and Sophia remained on the porch, wrapped in that perfect silence that comes not from absence, but from fullness. The silence that, given time and care and love, had blossomed into something more beautiful than either could have imagined. The silence that blooms,